Welcome, Eastview Scholars, to the carbon edition of Sharp Shorts. Let's talk about everything carbon and what that means for biological organisms. Start with our quote on the front page there that says, "Water may be the solvent of the universe, but carbon is the duct tape of life." That's from Natalie Angier. And as we talked about water and its emergent properties and how important it is as the biological medium for all the living things, the other component that you need there is that stuff that will give you the structure to live in a watery environment and to survive and have separation of the environment and the ability to create cells and stuff. And that is the importance of carbon, as we see. Every cell, every component of a cell, you could be a plant, a shrubbery, a fish, a shark, a worm, a bug, dust mites. You could be a dog, a cat, a sophomore, a junior, a senior. You could even, as you can see by our diagram here, be a non-living virus or freshman, very similar. Those all contain carbon as the basis of their structure. Why? Because carbon, with its tetravalent shell, is amazingly strong, it's amazingly resourceful, it is flexible, and very social. It's got 4 apartments for rent that it wants to share with, and it will bond with every other element on a periodic table, except of course the noble gases, who don't want to share their toys with anybody. Okay. The other key to understanding carbon is because of its valence shell structure and its 4 valence electrons. It is unparalleled compared to any other element in its ability to form bonds with itself. And that carbon-carbon bond is one of the strongest that is known. Because of that and its ability to do so, it can create chains and loops and planes and trains and automobiles and buckyballs and all sorts of shapes and stuff that leads to the diversity. Remember, one of our big overall writing questions is, how do we have so much diversity in the living organisms in the world? And carbon gives us that ability. Okay. Now, in the big picture, as far as the cycle, where does that all come from? Well, we can see here by the diagram that really the major source of carbon is from our atmosphere, and photosynthetic plants really take the carbon dioxide and bring the carbon into forms that can be used by consumers and animals and fungi, and I'm a fungi. And those things, as they eat the plants and stuff, to make that carbon and use that carbon readily for structure and stuff. And of course it cycles back into the atmosphere as things decompose from plant and animal biomass, from cellular respiration of some of the phytoplankton and everything else. We also are chugging carbon dioxide into the atmosphere when we burn fossil fuels and wood and stuff. Now, in reality, in this cycle, generally the role of cellular respiration and degradation in the carbon dioxide brought back into the atmosphere is in balance with the photosynthetic organisms that are pulling out that carbon dioxide and making the carbon available in that cycle of life. And this is what's known as your greenhouse gas. One of the things we have noticed since the industrial age, and we'll talk about this more when we talk ecosystem stuff, is that since the industrial age, with our burning of fossil fuels and wood and everything else, basically we are upsetting that balance, I guess is a way you could say. We are kind of throwing extra in the cycle more than the photosynthetic organisms can talk about, which is leading to global warming. And we're not going to get into that now, but let's just make that statement again, that greenhouse effect and global warming are not the same thing. We need the greenhouse effect to keep the Earth at a stable temperature, but we are, by chugging more greenhouse gases in, have data that shows that the Earth's temperature is warming. But that's for another video. All right. Here's our final subject. So we talked about hydrocarbons are nonpolar back in the chemistry video. Carbon and hydrogen, having essentially the same electronegativity, are nonpolar bonds, as are the diatomic elements. And that is a very good thing, as it leads to the ability to have that structure that doesn't dissolve in a watery environment, as all living organisms are surrounded by water. But then if we have that carbon-hydrogen bond, which is nonpolar and therefore hydrophobic, how do we get hydrocarbon skeletons and the structure and stuff to actually perform functions that we need as a living being and stuff? And the key to that is the functional groups, and that's the last thing that we're going to run through quickly, is just the functional groups that are available. First, here you can see the alcohols with that hydroxyl group on the end. That allows for dissolving. They can form hydrogen bonds with the water molecules because water is polar, and then helping dissolve organic compounds such as sugars and stuff like that. So that's a very strong thing of alcohols. Carbonyl group. Carbonyl groups are, in your experience, you would know them as aromatic stuff with tastes and flavors and everything else. They speak a lot with that carbonyl group. They are looked at a lot for, they make a couple big classes of sugars, and they're looked at a lot for carbon structure and reactivity, because that carbon double bond is very reactive in chemistry. The carboxyl group, that is your organic acids, carboxylic acids, and will function so in organic situations. The amine group is your basic group, and then acts as a base. And I know what you're saying to yourself right now. Hey, amino acids. Here's an amino acid. Amino acids are both, have both a carboxylic acid group, a carboxyl group, and an amine group. Hey, they can have possibly functions as an acid or base. Very true. And what we'll also see when we talk about proteins is this allows for a dehydration synthesis reaction that forms a peptide bond to put those amino acids together, and then give wide diversity of the function of proteins. Sulfhydryl groups are great cross-linking. The example, of course, is making hair straight or curly or something, depending on the permanent and what you're breaking down. But you can see they have cysteine here, which its side chain on the amino acid is a sulfhydryl group, and that allows for some cross-linking and covalent bonding. Okay. Phosphate groups, as you might hear, a lot of phosphates in your soaps and stuff. But as far as living organisms, they provide a lot of energy and stuff. They can react with water, release energy. You should think ATP right there, and that function in organic. And last but not least, we'll talk about the methyl group, and here's one example. But methyl groups, not illustrated here, but methyl groups, when we talk about the expression of genetics and DNA, methyl groups are a key component in how genes are expressed. In this case, with the steroids, you can see the difference in the methyl group is very important in the functional group of the steroid, which for these two is mighty important. Anyhow, there we go. A quick look at carbon and its functions. I also recommend that you go to the Sophia site and go through the NPR videos that I have linked up there that talk about carbon and its role in greenhouse gases and greenhouse effect, which is something we will talk about when we pull the whole thing together and talk ecology. Anyhow, scholar up, Eastview.